Loretta Saunders was born on August 25, 1987, in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, located in the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador. She was a proud Inuk woman, part of the Indigenous Inuit community, a fact that she never shied away from and fully embraced in both her personal life and academic work. Despite the many systemic challenges Indigenous people often face in Canada, including discrimination, lack of access to education, and historical trauma, Loretta broke barriers. She became one of the few Inuk women pursuing higher education at a university level, a powerful symbol of perseverance and excellence. At 26 years old, she was a criminology honors student at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She was known among her peers and professors for her intelligence, compassion, and dedication to social justice. Her academic focus wasn't just theoretical, it was deeply personal and meaningful. Loretta was working on an honors thesis focused on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIWG, a subject that affects thousands of Indigenous families in Canada and is often ignored by mainstream society. What made Loretta's work so impactful was that she wasn't just writing about statistics, she was giving voice to silenced victims, using her own life experience, community connections, and scholarly research to expose the violence and neglect Indigenous women face. Her thesis aimed to explore the systemic causes behind these disappearances and murders, including racism, poverty, inadequate policing, and colonial legacy. Her professors later shared that her work was exceptionally important and could have contributed to national awareness on MMIWG had she lived to complete it. In a tragic twist of fate, Loretta became one of the very statistics she had dedicated herself to studying: a young Indigenous woman murdered in Canada. On February 13, 2014, Loretta Saunders left her Halifax apartment with what seemed like a routine task. She was going to collect rent from her two roommates, Blake Leggett and Victoria Henberry, who were subletting her apartment while she lived with her boyfriend. Loretta was known to be responsible, punctual, and always in communication with her family. So when she suddenly stopped responding to calls and messages, her loved ones immediately became concerned. Days passed with no contact. By February 17th, 4 days later, her family officially reported her missing to police. The delay in reporting wasn't due to negligence. It was partially because authorities initially downplayed the urgency, a sadly common pattern in missing Indigenous women cases. Loretta's sister and boyfriend grew increasingly alarmed, especially since Loretta had been pregnant at the time and was deeply invested in finishing her thesis. Her sudden disappearance simply didn't add up. Shortly after the report was filed, Loretta's car was found abandoned in Ontario, far from Halifax. Shockingly, Blake Leggett and Victoria Henberry were found driving it. Authorities arrested them on suspicion of vehicle theft, but quickly, the case took a darker turn. Evidence began to point toward a violent crime. Then, on February 26, 2014, the case reached a heartbreaking conclusion. Loretta's body was discovered along the Trans-Canada Highway near Salisbury, New Brunswick. It had been stuffed inside a hockey bag and left in a wooded median, about 400 kilometers from where she had disappeared. Her body showed signs of blunt force trauma and strangulation. The chilling nature of the disposal, concealed in a sports bag, dumped off a major road, reflected the brutal and careless way her life had been taken. For her family and community, it was a devastating moment. Not only had they lost Loretta, but she had died in the same way as the many Indigenous women she was researching. Police officer arrest of roommates. The betrayal within. The investigation into Loretta Saunders' disappearance rapidly evolved after police discovered that her 2010 Toyota Celica had been driven far from Halifax and ended up in Ontario, hundreds of kilometers away. The individuals found behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle were not strangers. They were her roommates and subletters, Blake Leggett and Victoria Henberry. This discovery was not only alarming but deeply personal. Loretta had trusted the couple enough to let them live in her apartment, and they had been the last known people to see her alive. Oncoming police car arrest and interrogation. Police arrested the pair on February 18, 2014, initially on charges of vehicle theft and fraud. However, as detectives began questioning them and collecting evidence, their stories quickly unraveled. Traces of blood and forensic evidence began tying them to something far worse. While in custody, Blake Leggett broke first. He confessed that on the morning of February 13th, when Loretta came to collect overdue rent, he attacked her from behind, strangled, and suffocated her in a fit of rage. He admitted he killed her in the very apartment she had let them stay in. His motive? He and Henberry owed Loretta around $430 in rent and feared eviction. After killing her, Blake and Victoria hid her body in the apartment for several hours before stuffing her into a hockey bag. The couple then cleaned up the crime scene, loaded the bag into Loretta's car, and began driving across provinces in an attempt to dispose of the body and flee unnoticed. Glove's joint involvement. Though Blake was the one who physically committed the murder, Victoria Henberry played a complicit role. She helped cover up the killing, clean up the evidence, and dispose of the body. In her later plea deal, she admitted to helping conceal the crime and assisting with the transportation and dumping of Loretta's body. What made the case especially chilling was the betrayal of trust. Loretta had not only offered them shelter, she had shown them kindness and patience with rent. In return, they saw her as an obstacle to eliminate. Balance scale, sentencing, and motive, justice, but not closure. After their arrest and confessions, Blake Leggett and Victoria Henberry were both charged in connection with the cold-blooded murder of Loretta Saunders. As the case unfolded in court, their roles in the crime became clearer, and so did the senseless motive that led to Loretta's death. Adult balance scale, Blake Leggett, first-degree murder. Blake Leggett, the main perpetrator, eventually pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. This charge indicated that the killing was planned and deliberate. Though he initially denied the murder, his own words and the forensic evidence ultimately left little room for doubt. The court accepted his guilty plea, sparing the family a long and emotionally painful trial. In April 2015, Leggett was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder under Canadian law. This was the harshest punishment available in Canada, though some still felt it could never fully deliver justice for what Loretta endured. Adult balance scale, Victoria Henberry, second-degree murder. Victoria Henberry, while not the one who physically killed Loretta, was by no means an innocent bystander. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging that she had aided in the cover-up, helped transport Loretta's body, and participated in disposing of her remains. In April 2015, she received a sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years, which reflected her lesser but still deeply troubling involvement in the crime. The court considered the fact that she did not physically carry out the murder, but also emphasized that her actions showed a complete lack of humanity and regard for Loretta's life. Money with Wings, the shocking motive, $430. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire case was the trivial and pathetic motive behind the killing. At the time, Leggett and Henberry were unemployed, broke, and owed Loretta about $430 in back rent. Loretta had given them repeated chances to pay, but they feared being evicted. Instead of confronting their financial issues like responsible adults, they chose to eliminate Loretta, a woman who had shown them nothing but kindness. The murder was not fueled by rage, nor a heat-of-the-moment argument. It was a deliberate choice to kill someone over a minor debt and then steal her car and attempt to flee. Glow showing America's aftermath and broader impact, from tragedy to national reckoning. Loretta Saunders' brutal murder in 2014 sent shockwaves across Canada, not only because of its horrific nature but also because of who she was and what she stood for. Loretta wasn't just another statistic. She was an Indigenous woman researching the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIWG, and then became a victim of the very crisis she was fighting to expose. Her death sparked national outrage and mourning, particularly within Indigenous communities, universities, and activist circles. What made it so devastating and symbolic was that Loretta's case was a living example of the violence, systemic neglect, and injustice Indigenous women routinely face in Canada, something she had been academically working to document and change. Underscore 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 underscore. Loudspeaker fueling the hashtag AMINext movement. Following her death, the hashtag AMINext movement gained enormous momentum. It was a grassroots social media campaign started by Indigenous women to raise awareness about the epidemic of violence against them. The hashtag asked a simple, haunting question: am I next? Calling attention to how Indigenous women were going missing and being murdered at staggering rates, often without justice or media attention. Loretta's story gave the campaign a face and a name, and her murder served as a tipping point in forcing Canadians and lawmakers to confront the issue head-on. Underscore 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 underscore. Classical Building National Inquiry into MMIWG. Due in part to mounting pressure from Loretta's case and the growing national movement, the Canadian government was compelled to act. In 2015, they announced a formal national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, which officially launched in 2017. The inquiry aimed to examine the underlying causes of this national crisis, from colonialism and systemic racism to poverty and law enforcement failure. While the inquiry has received both praise and criticism, there is no denying that Loretta's murder played a pivotal role in making it happen. She became a symbol of the very injustice she tried to change, and a painful reminder that the issue was deeply real. Underscore 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 underscore. Graduation cap, Loretta Saunders Community Scholarship and Legacy. Determined to ensure Loretta's name would not be forgotten, her family took action. They established the Loretta Saunders Community Scholarship Fund, which provides financial support to students, particularly Indigenous youth, who are pursuing education in social justice, Indigenous studies, or related fields. The goal is to continue Loretta's work and help others follow in her footsteps as agents of change. Her sister, Loretta Saunders, emerged as a powerful advocate for Indigenous rights, speaking at national and international platforms, including the United Nations. Delilah continues to raise awareness about MMIWG, justice reform, and Indigenous sovereignty, carrying forward the mission Loretta began.